Sir, I said hands on the hood, now!
That's my wife. That's my son. I haven't done anything wrong.
Don't talk back. Hands on the hood.
You're making a mistake.
The only mistake is you not listening.
You don't know who you're dealing with.
They thought he was just a big, heavy man in the wrong neighborhood. What they didn't know was that he once led one of the most elite military teams in the world. Before I continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And please, if you enjoy stories that open your eyes and move your heart, subscribe to the channel so you never miss one. Blue and red lights flashed across the windows of the Carter family home. Sirens screamed through the quiet night, loud and sharp, cutting into every heartbeat. But there was no real emergency. Emma Carter stood frozen at the bottom of her porch steps, her hand shaking as she held her phone. Her other arm was stretched out, as if she could somehow shield her 16-year-old son, Jordan, from what was happening just a few feet away. Across the yard, Jordan held his basketball under one arm. His eyes were wide, confused, scared. He didn't understand why 4 police cars had surrounded their house like a crime scene. And standing between them all was his father, David Carter, tall, strong, and broad-shouldered. His walk carried the limp of a man who had seen war and lived through it. He had been walking back from the mailbox when the flashing lights appeared. Now he faced 3 officers yelling orders at him as if he had done something wrong. "Sir, hands on the hood. Now." One officer shouted, his hand near his weapon. David's voice was calm, steady, and low, but there was power behind it. "That's my wife. That's my son. I haven't done anything wrong." The officers didn't back away. Another step forward, his tone sharp and threatening. "Do it right now." Emma shouted from the porch, her voice shaking but fierce. "He's standing on his own property. You can't talk to him like that." Her words only made things worse. One of the officers, a younger man with a buzz cut, turned toward Jordan and yelled, "Drop the ball. Hands where I can see them." Jordan froze. His only weapon was that orange basketball, now pressed against his chest like a shield. Neighbors began peeking through their curtains. Some stepped outside, phones in hand, recording everything. The air was thick with fear, the kind of fear that comes when one wrong move could change everything forever. David knew that fear well, but he never thought he would feel it standing in his own front yard, with his wife and son watching. The young officer stepped closer. "Hands on the hood," he barked again. Before David could speak, the officer shoved him hard in the chest. Emma gasped. Jordan dropped the basketball. People yelled from nearby porches. But David didn't move. He stood firm, his eyes fixed on the officer. His voice was quiet but filled with control. "You are making a mistake," he said. The officer smirked, thinking David was scared. "The only mistake is not doing what I said." Emma took a step forward, tears in her eyes. "Stop. He's not a criminal. He served this country. David turned his head slightly and spoke softly. "Stay back. Let me handle this." Jordan couldn't stay silent anymore. "That's my dad. He didn't do anything," he shouted. The boy's voice cut through the noise like a blade, and everyone turned toward him. But the officers didn't care who David was. To them, he was just a big black man who looked like someone from a call they received. They didn't see his years of service. They only saw a target. David's mind raced. He could tell them who he really was, but part of him refused. Why should he need to prove his worth in his own yard? Still, he knew the situation was close to turning dangerous. He looked the officer straight in the eyes. His tone was firm but calm. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The officer laughed under his breath, but that laugh wouldn't last long. Months before, the Carters had moved to Maplewood Lane, in a quiet town outside Portland. David had hoped for peace. After 20 years in the military, this neighborhood was supposed to be a fresh start. But they stood out. Emma noticed the smiles that didn't reach people's eyes. Jordan's classmates asked if he was just visiting. David, ever the soldier, noticed the small looks, the kind people give when they've already decided who you are. He told Emma, "We didn't come here for them. We came here for us." He tried to ignore it all. But tonight, one call from a nervous neighbor had broken the peace completely. A large man walking around. That was all it took for 4 police cars to show up. The young officer shoved David again. "Put your hands on the hood." Emma's voice cracked. "You're harassing him. He fought for this country." Jordan's hands trembled. "You're scaring my mom," he said, stepping closer. That moment made even one of the officers hesitate. But the one in charge, angry and red-faced, shoved David's shoulder again, trying to force him to the car. David didn't move. His stillness was more powerful than any punch. It scared the officers more than a fight ever could. Finally, David decided he'd had enough. His voice changed. It was no longer soft or patient. It was commanding. The voice of a man who had led missions most people couldn't imagine. "You do not command me," he said clearly. "Not here. Not now. Not after everything I've done for this country." The crowd murmured. People started whispering. He raised his chin slightly and continued, his voice strong and echoing. "I led men in Delta Force. I commanded missions in war zones you couldn't last 5 minutes in. I've been shot at, bombed, and still came home standing. You think shoving me is going to break me?" The air went silent. The young officer's grin vanished. His hand dropped from his gun. The others looked at each other, realization spreading across their faces. They weren't facing a suspect anymore. They were facing a man who had trained soldiers, a man who had given his strength, his peace, and almost his life for the flag they wore on their sleeves. But pride is hard to swallow. The lead officer, his face tight with frustration, said, "I don't care who you think you are. You follow orders or you go to jail." David's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped low. "I've stared down men with rifles pointed at my head and didn't blink. The only reason I'm standing here calm is because I won't let my son see his father dragged away from his own home." He took one small step forward. "You will leave tonight. And you'll remember that you laid hands on a man who fought for the very freedom you're supposed to protect." The crowd of neighbors, still recording, whispered among themselves. The weight of his words hit everyone. The officer in charge finally broke eye contact and muttered something to his team. One by one, the patrol cars began to back away. Blue and red lights faded down the street until the night was quiet again. Emma ran to David, wrapping her arms around him. Jordan stood beside them, eyes filled with both fear and pride. "Dad," he whispered, "why didn't you tell them who you were earlier?" David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Because, son, I shouldn't have to say it. A man shouldn't need medals to be treated like a human being. But tonight, I had to say it to keep you safe." The nightmare was over, at least for that night. But their story was far from finished. By morning, videos from the neighbors had gone viral. "Veteran harassed on his own lawn" became the headline everywhere. Local news played the clip over and over. The police department released a short statement saying they would look into it. But the community wasn't satisfied. That evening, David stood in front of the neighborhood homeowners group. Some people supported him. Others, like one woman named Carol, said he should have just obeyed. David looked straight at her and spoke calmly. "The only people in danger that night were my wife and son, watching 4 armed officers treat me like a criminal in front of our house. I served 20 years for the right to stand here as a free man. What happened was wrong, and it can't be ignored." His words carried weight, not just because of his background, but because they were true. The people in the room fell silent. 2 days later, David stood outside the police station, facing cameras and reporters. Emma stood beside him, holding Jordan's hand. "I don't want special treatment," David said firmly. "I just want what every person deserves, respect, safety, and the right to live without fear. Then, something powerful happened. Jordan stepped forward, his voice small but steady. "I thought they were going to take my dad away," he said. I'll never forget how he stood there. He didn't fight. He didn't yell. He just stood tall. Not because he was stronger, but because he wouldn't let them make him feel small. The moment hit everyone watching. It wasn't just about a soldier anymore. It was about a father protecting his family's dignity. The next day, the police chief asked David to come in for a private meeting. "We're sorry for what happened," the chief began. "It was a misunderstanding." David's reply was quiet, but it cut deep. A misunderstanding is when someone turns down the wrong street. What happened in my yard was harassment. It could have ended in tragedy. You need to hold your officers responsible. The chief looked down. He had no answer. That evening, David and Jordan sat together on the porch swing, the same spot where the chaos had started. Jordan asked softly, "Were you scared that night?" David looked out into the yard, the grass glowing under the porch light. "Yes," he said honestly, "but not for me. I was scared you'd grow up thinking that's how things are supposed to be. Never forget who you are, son. Always stand tall." Jordan nodded, his young eyes full of understanding far beyond his age. The world had seen what happened. The story spread beyond their town. And though David knew the fight wasn't over, something inside him felt lighter. He hadn't just stood up for himself. He had shown his son what courage really looked like. Courage isn't shouting. It isn't fighting. It's standing firm when the world tries to push you down, and refusing to lose your dignity. That night, the porch light stayed on. And for the first time in days, the Carters slept in peace. David had faced many battles in his life. But this one, the battle to stay human, to stay seen, to stay respected, was the most important of them all. The man they underestimated had once commanded soldiers. But that night, he commanded something far greater. The power of quiet strength, of truth, and of love that never backs down. If you believe in stories that show real courage and humanity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more people see the truth behind the headlines.